The emergency room curtain hadn't even finished closing when my father leaned over my hospital bed. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Mila, don't tell them Vanessa pushed you." I stared at him through tears I hadn't realized were falling. My left wrist throbbed so violently that every heartbeat felt like someone twisting broken glass deeper into my arm. Dad glanced toward the hallway to make sure no one was listening. "Please," he said, "she has her whole life ahead of her." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Does it hurt?" Just, "Protect your sister." A flash of memory slammed into me. Vanessa's face, red with rage. The dining room chair scraping across the floor. Her hands shoving me with everything she had. The edge of the granite kitchen island rushing toward me. Then the crack. I swallowed hard. A doctor pulled back the curtain, clipboard in hand. "What happened to your wrist?" Before I could answer, Dad smiled. "She slipped." His answer came so quickly it sounded rehearsed. The doctor looked from him to me. Then she asked again, "What happened?" For a second, I almost repeated the same lie I'd been preparing since the ambulance arrived. But nothing came out. The doctor's expression changed ever so slightly. She'd noticed something. And suddenly, I wasn't sure who had the real control in that room anymore. The emergency department buzzed with the usual sounds of rolling stretchers, overhead announcements, and hurried footsteps, but inside my treatment room everything felt strangely still. My wrist had already begun swelling beneath the temporary splint the paramedics wrapped around it. The pain wasn't confined to my arm. My shoulder ached. My ribs burned whenever I breathed too deeply. Even my knees were bruised from where I'd crashed onto the tile floor. The doctor gently lifted my forearm. "I'm going to examine you now." Dad stepped closer. It really was an accident. The doctor didn't acknowledge him. Instead, she carefully inspected the bruises creeping up my forearm. Then another on my upper arm. Then one near my shoulder. She paused. "Can everyone give us a minute?" Dad frowned. "I'd rather stay. I need to examine my patient privately." Her tone remained calm. Not rude. Not argumentative. Just firm. For the first time all evening, someone had told my father no. He hesitated before leaving with an obvious look of frustration. A second later, the room fell completely silent. The doctor rolled her stool closer. "My name is Dr. Reynolds." She folded her hands together. "I'm going to ask you one question." I couldn't even meet her eyes. "Did someone do this to you?" My mouth went dry. Every instinct I'd learned over 29 years told me to protect my family. To keep the peace. To make excuses. "It's complicated," I whispered. Dr. Reynolds waited. She didn't interrupt. She didn't pressure me. She simply looked at the bruises one more time before meeting my eyes. Then she quietly said words no one in my family had ever said to me. "You're safe now." Without another word, she reached toward the phone mounted beside the hospital bed and began dialing. Dad burst back into the examination room before the doctor could finish entering her notes. "Mila," he said urgently, shutting the curtain behind him, "whatever she asked you, don't answer any more questions." His voice had lost its calm. His hands were shaking. "This is getting out of hand." Dr. Reynolds looked up from the computer. "Mr. Carter, I'm still evaluating my patient." He ignored her. He looked only at me. "You know your sister. She gets emotional. She didn't mean for this to happen." I stared at the blanket covering my legs. The pain medication was finally dulling the throbbing in my wrist, but it couldn't quiet the knot growing in my stomach. Dad stepped closer. "Vanessa starts graduate school in 2 months. If this turns into a police report..." He stopped himself before finishing. "You can't let one bad night ruin the rest of her life." One bad night. Those words echoed in my head. because even as he said them, I knew they weren't true. Dr. Reynolds calmly stood. "Mr. Carter, I need you to wait outside. This is a family matter." "No," she replied evenly. "This is a medical examination." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Finally, Dad exhaled sharply. He pointed at me before leaving. "Think carefully before you say anything." The curtain snapped shut behind him. The room felt lighter the moment he disappeared. After several moments of silence, Dr. Reynolds gently continued examining my injuries. She measured the swelling around my wrist before carefully documenting every bruise. When she reached my upper arm, she paused. "How did this one happen?" I looked down. "I don't remember." She wrote something. "And this one." I bumped into a shelf. Another note. "This bruise near your shoulder." I probably hit a door. Even as the excuses left my mouth, they sounded strangely automatic. Dr. Reynolds didn't argue. She simply listened. Then she asked quietly, "Do you always have an explanation ready?" The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth and realized I did. Every bruise, every scrape, every accident. I'd spent years explaining injuries before anyone even asked. While the doctor updated my chart, memories surfaced that I'd buried years ago. I was 12 when Vanessa shoved me down the basement stairs after I accidentally broke her headphones. Dad told everyone I'd slipped. When I was 16, Vanessa threw a ceramic mug that split open my eyebrow. Dad drove me to urgent care and told the nurse I'd walked into a cabinet. On my 21st birthday, Vanessa grabbed my wrist so hard it left fingerprints for days. Dad laughed it off. "You know how sisters are." The pattern had always been the same. Vanessa exploded. I got hurt. Dad cleaned up the story. And somehow, everyone accepted it. Not because they believed it. Because it was easier. A vibration against the hospital mattress pulled me back to the present. My phone. "Vanessa." One text. "You need to fix this now." Another arrived seconds later. "Tell them you fell." Then another. "Dad said you're freaking everyone out." I stared at the messages. Not one asked whether my wrist was broken. Not one asked if I was in pain. Only whether I was still protecting her. For the first time in my life. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Dr. Reynolds quietly returned with another chart in her hands. She looked once at my phone screen before placing it face down beside me. Then her eyes settled on the faint, faded marks scattered across my arms. She spoke almost to herself. "I've seen injuries like these before." She looked directly at me. "So why," she asked softly, "do I have the feeling this isn't the first time someone has hurt you?" Two uniformed police officers walked through the emergency department doors less than 20 minutes later. The atmosphere changed instantly. Conversations lowered. A nurse quietly pointed them toward my room. Dad saw them first. His face drained of color. "They actually called the police," he muttered. Before anyone answered, Vanessa stormed into the hallway, still wearing the same sweater she'd had on at dinner. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "She fell." One of the officers raised a hand. "Ma'am, we'll speak with everyone individually. There isn't anything to investigate. We'll determine that." For the first time in years, someone wasn't accepting Vanessa's version simply because she said it confidently. She folded her arms and glared at my room. "This is unbelievable." Within minutes, several relatives who had been at dinner began arriving after hearing what had happened. Instead of asking how I was, they surrounded Dad. "A police report," my aunt whispered. Dad rubbed his forehead. "The hospital overreacted." My uncle nodded toward my room. "Mila's always been sensitive." Another cousin sighed. "Vanessa didn't mean it." Their words drifted through the partially open curtain. Not one of them had seen the X-rays. Not one of them had asked how badly my wrist was broken. They were already defending the person who hurt me. An officer stepped into the room, carrying a small notebook. Mila Carter. Yes, I'm Officer Daniels. He pulled up a chair instead of standing over me. I'd like to hear exactly what happened. No interruptions. No one answering for me. Just one simple request. Tell me in your own words. Across the hallway, another officer questioned Vanessa separately. I was trying to walk past her. She insisted loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. She lost her balance. Officer Ruiz made a note. So you never touched her. Vanessa hesitated. I might have brushed against her. A few minutes later, she changed it again. I pushed her a little because she wouldn't move. Every answer seemed slightly different from the last. Meanwhile, Dr. Reynolds entered my room carrying my imaging results. She laid the X-ray on the light board. The fracture starts here, she explained, pointing carefully. It continues through the distal radius. Officer Daniels watched quietly. Dr. Reynolds continued. This type of injury is much more consistent with someone forcefully breaking a fall after being propelled forward than with simply slipping on a level kitchen floor. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't accuse anyone. She simply explained the medical evidence. Officer Daniels wrote every word down. Hospital staff continued separating everyone into different waiting areas. One by one, relatives were asked to describe what they'd seen. Most repeated the same story. It happened so fast. I wasn't looking. They were both upset. Then my younger cousin Emily was escorted into a consultation room. She couldn't have been older than 22. 10 minutes later, she walked back into the hallway looking pale. Dad intercepted her immediately. What did you tell them? Emily swallowed. The truth. Dad's expression hardened. We agreed this stays inside the family. Emily shook her head. I never agreed. His jaw tightened. She looked toward my room before quietly adding, I've been pretending I didn't see things for years. Those words spread through the hallway faster than a shout. Relatives who had confidently defended Vanessa minutes earlier stopped talking. Eyes began shifting from one family member to another. Everyone suddenly wondered who else had seen something they never admitted. Vanessa noticed the change immediately. She marched toward Emily. What did you say? Emily didn't answer. Vanessa stepped closer. You'd better not be making things up. Officer Ruiz calmly moved between them. That's enough. I wasn't doing anything. You were told not to approach witnesses. I wasn't threatening her. You raised your voice and ignored a direct instruction. Vanessa threw her hands into the air. This whole family is unbelievable. Patients in nearby rooms turned to look. Nurses stopped walking. Even Dad looked stunned. Without realizing it, Vanessa had become the loudest, angriest person in the emergency department. The confident image she had relied on for years began cracking in full view of strangers. Officer Daniels closed his notebook. He exchanged a brief look with his partner before speaking quietly. We're going to need statements about previous incidents, too. Silence swept across the hallway. No one answered. By the next morning, the investigation had spread far beyond the emergency room. Instead of treating it as a single argument between sisters, investigators began interviewing everyone who had been inside the Carter house that evening. For the first time in years, family members weren't sitting together comparing stories. They were speaking separately, one by one. Dad waited outside one of the interview rooms, packing. Every time a relative walked out, he quietly pulled them aside. Remember, he whispered, don't speculate, just answer what they ask. My uncle finally stopped walking. Tom, They're asking about things that happened years ago. Dad's face tightened. Then tell them you don't remember. Before another word could be exchanged, an investigator stepped into the hallway. Mr. Carter. Dad immediately straightened. We need you next. The confidence he'd carried since the hospital was beginning to disappear. Later that afternoon, Officer Daniels returned to my room with a thick folder. We've been reviewing previous medical records. I frowned. My records? He nodded. Only those relevant to today's investigation. He opened the folder carefully. There was an emergency visit 6 years ago for a shoulder injury. I remembered it instantly. Vanessa had shoved me into a bookshelf during an argument over our grandmother's jewelry. Dad told the urgent care physician I'd slipped while carrying storage boxes. Officer Daniels turned another page. Then an urgent care visit for facial stitches. The coffee mug. The words escaped before I could stop them. He looked up. You didn't fall into a cabinet. I slowly shook my head. No. Another page. A sprained ankle. Another. 2 cracked ribs. Every visit had the same pattern. An injury. An explanation. No questions. No report. No accountability. I covered my face with my good hand. I can't believe I kept saying the same lies. You weren't the only one, Officer Daniels replied quietly. That afternoon, Dr. Reynolds visited before the end of her shift. She carried a clipboard but pulled up a chair instead of immediately speaking. I wanted to explain something. I nodded. When I examined you yesterday, your wrist wasn't the only thing I noticed. She gently pointed toward a fatting bruise near my upper arm. Some bruises were fresh. Then toward another barely visible mark. Others were healing. She paused. The locations, the different stages of healing, and the way you answered my questions. I looked down. You already knew. I suspected. She chose her words carefully. I've treated many patients who have learned to explain away injuries because they believe protecting someone else is more important than protecting themselves. My throat tightened. I almost lied. I know. She smiled gently. And then you didn't. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, I allowed myself to believe that telling the truth hadn't destroyed my family. It had simply exposed what my family had been hiding. Over the next several days, investigators continued collecting statements. The stories no longer matched. Emily admitted she'd seen Vanessa shove me before. My aunt reluctantly acknowledged hearing arguments, followed by unexplained injuries. Even my uncle finally confessed he'd questioned Dad privately years earlier. I asked him once if something was wrong. He told investigators. He said sisters fight and Mila bruises easily. One admission encouraged another. The silence that had protected Vanessa for years slowly collapsed under its own weight. Meanwhile, Vanessa stopped answering investigators' calls directly. Her attorney began communicating on her behalf. Dad grew increasingly desperate. He came to see me one evening after physical therapy. He looked exhausted. Older. Mila. I didn't answer. He sat across from me. I know I asked too much. I remained silent. They're talking about filing charges. They are filing charges, I corrected quietly. He closed his eyes. If you tell them you don't want to cooperate. I interrupted him for the first time in my life. No. The single word hung between us. He stared at me as though he didn't recognize his own daughter. I spent years protecting everyone else, I said calmly. I'm done. Before Dad could respond, there was a knock on the open door. The lead investigator stepped inside, carrying a thick case file tucked beneath one arm. He looked from my father to me. Then he spoke. I have the completed file. Dad slowly stood. The room became completely silent. The completed investigation left very little room for doubt. Over the following weeks, investigators compared every witness statement with the medical records, the photographs taken in the emergency department, and the timeline of events from the night of the family dinner. The pieces fit together. Vanessa had become enraged after I refused to tell our relatives that the missing family money had been misplaced instead of admitting she'd secretly borrowed it without permission. The argument escalated. She shoved me with enough force that I crashed sideways into the granite kitchen island before instinctively throwing out my left arm to break the fall. That impact fractured my wrist. The medical evidence matched the witness statements. The witness statements matched each other. And for the first time, no one was able to rewrite what had happened. During one final meeting, Officer Daniels explained the findings with quiet professionalism. This case isn't based on one person's accusation. He looked at the file before continuing. It's based on physical evidence, independent witness interviews, prior medical records, and inconsistent explanations that changed repeatedly. Dad sat across the room without saying a word. His shoulders, once permanently squared with confidence, had collapsed inward. For years, he'd believed that if everyone repeated the same story, the truth would simply disappear. Instead, every lie had become another piece of evidence showing a pattern. Vanessa was formally charged with assault causing bodily injury. Her graduate program placed her admission on indefinite suspension while the legal process moved forward. She blamed everyone except herself. She blamed me. She blamed the hospital. She blamed the investigators. She even blamed Emily for betraying the family. But she never once apologized for breaking my wrist. A few days later, I received a message asking whether I wanted to meet Dad. After thinking about it overnight, I agreed. We met at a quiet park near the physical therapy clinic. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, Dad broke the silence. I kept telling myself I was protecting both of my daughters. I looked at him but said nothing. I thought if Vanessa avoided consequences, she'd eventually grow out of this. His voice cracked. I never realized that every time I protected her. He stopped. I was asking you to carry the consequences instead. For the first time in my life, he wasn't asking me to forgive anyone. He wasn't asking me to stay quiet. He was admitting what he'd done. I failed you, he whispered. Tears filled his eyes. I know saying that doesn't fix anything. It doesn't, I answered honestly. But it's the first true thing you've said to me about this. He nodded slowly. There wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. There couldn't be. Some damage isn't repaired by a single apology. But for once, neither of us pretended the past had been different than it really was. The months that followed looked nothing like the life I'd always known. Physical therapy was slow. Simple tasks like opening jars, lifting grocery bags, or turning a doorknob reminded me how serious the injury had been. Each week, my wrist grew a little stronger. So did I. I accepted extra responsibilities at the pharmacy, where I worked and eventually earned a promotion to inventory supervisor. With my new income, I signed the lease on my own apartment. It wasn't large. It wasn't luxurious. But it was peaceful. For the first time, home wasn't a place where I waited for the next explosion. It was somewhere I could finally exhale. Several relatives reached out over the following months. Emily visited often. So many of us knew something was wrong, she admitted one afternoon over coffee. We just kept believing your dad, and he said keeping quiet was the loving thing to do. It wasn't love, I replied. It was fear. She nodded. And fear kept all of us trapped. Other relatives apologized too. Not because anyone forced them. Because they had finally stopped lying to themselves. I heard occasional updates about Vanessa through extended family. She eventually accepted a plea agreement, rather than taking the case to trial. Part of her sentence required anger management counseling. Whether she truly changed was something only time could answer. I stopped measuring my own healing by what happened to her. That chapter no longer belonged to me. Dad remained in contact, though our relationship never returned to what it had once been. Trust doesn't reappear simply because someone regrets losing it. It has to be rebuilt slowly, honestly, if it's rebuilt at all. He understood that now. And for the first time, he respected my boundaries instead of trying to erase them. Nearly a year after the night that changed everything, I returned to the same hospital for my final orthopedic follow-up. The fracture had healed completely. Dr. Reynolds smiled as she reviewed the latest x-rays. "Looks like this is the last time you'll need to see me." I was hoping you'd say that. As she walked me toward the exit, I paused. "I never really thanked you." She looked surprised. "You didn't have to. If you'd believed the story everyone else wanted you to believe." I looked down at the faint scar near my wrist. I'd probably still be making excuses. She smiled gently. "I didn't save you, Mila. You chose to tell the truth." I stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight. Almost instinctively, I flexed my wrist. There was only the slightest stiffness now. The scar remained. So did the memory. But neither controlled my life anymore. When I looked at that healed wrist, I no longer saw the night my sister fractured it. I saw the day one doctor refused to let my silence become someone else's protection.